There's a real whirlwind of change sweeping through the IRS right now. It seems to be touching everything, from the pulpit right down to your pocketbook.
Yeah.
And there's this renewed focus on, well, fairness and economic growth.
Absolutely. And just recently, President Trump made a pretty decisive move.
Right, removing the newly appointed IRS commissioner, Billy Long. He was barely there, less than 2 months?
Less than 2 months, yeah. And many conservatives are seeing this as ushering in a new era.
And this leadership change happened right after a huge policy shift under Long himself, didn't it?
It did. The reversal of that 70-year ban on political activity for tax-exempt religious groups, the Johnson Amendment.
That's a big one. And this reinterpretation, it really liberates religious leaders, allows them to speak more openly from the pulpit, which, from a conservative viewpoint, is framed as a significant victory for religious freedom. Free speech, too.
Mm-hmm. And the promise, or at least the argument, is that this era will foster economic growth, prevent that chilling effect on investment by urging the IRS to pivot, move away from aggressive audits and more towards supporting taxpayers.
So the big question is, what does all this rapid change, this shakeup really mean? For religious liberty, for the economy, and, ultimately for every American taxpayer. Today, we're taking a deep dive into these recent shifts at the IRS. We'll explore the reactions, which are complex, often conflicting, to churches gaining these new political freedoms. And we'll also dissect the urgent calls for fundamental reform inside the tax agency itself.
Yeah, try to cut through some of the noise.
Exactly. Get to the facts that explain these forces reshaping things. Okay, so to really get this, we need to go back to that foundational legal shift, the Johnson Amendment. It regulated political activity for religious groups for, 7 decades?
That's right, 7 decades. It was a provision from 1954 authored by Lyndon Johnson when he was a senator. And it essentially banned tax-exempt nonprofits, including religious groups, from endorsing or opposing political candidates.
And the history there is interesting, too.
It is. Congress adopted it pretty quickly, not much debate. It was apparently a reaction to Johnson's own campaign experience. Wealthy Texans funneling money against him through tax-exempt groups.
Huh. So his origins weren't even really about churches initially.
Well, that's what some argue. Bob Trent from the Center for Arizona Policy, he asserts the target was never churches, and that maybe it never actually applied to churches in the way it ended up being used.
Interesting. But regardless of origin, the Trump administration definitely took a different approach.
Oh, completely. Donald Trump promised to get rid of it back in his 2016 campaign. Then, just 4 months into office, he told the IRS, basically, don't enforce it.
And then Commissioner Long made it official.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This past July 7th, 2025, officially lifted the prohibition for religious groups. The IRS language was interesting, too, likening pulpit endorsements to a family discussion.
A family discussion.
Yeah. And the Trump Justice Department backed it up, asking a federal judge to actually prohibit future enforcement against houses of worship.
Okay, that is a dramatic pivot after 70 years.
Mm-hmm.
So how did religious leaders react? I mean, I can't imagine everyone was on the same page.
Definitely not. It triggered really different reactions. On one side, you had conservative religious leaders, evangelical groups. They largely welcomed it.
They'd been pushing for this for a while.
For years. They saw the amendment as infringing on free speech. You had Katie Roberts from the Southern Baptist Convention's Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission saying pastors should be free to speak on issues without fear of the government's retribution.
Okay.
And Reverend David Johnson in Arizona, another Southern Baptist leader, he said, the era of fear and intimidation is over. Though he did add a note of caution, urging pastors to use this freedom wisely.
Use it wisely.
Right. And, of course, figures like Reverend Robert Jeffress in Dallas, a longtime opponent of the amendment and a vocal Trump supporter, he was obviously pleased.
Okay, so a clear win for those feeling constrained. But what about the other side? Those expressing, maybe caution, concern.
Yeah, there was significant caution, too. The Right Reverend Jennifer Redall, an Episcopal bishop in Arizona, wrote very clearly that clergy ought not endorse particular candidates from the pulpit.
Why? What was her reasoning?
She emphasized the pulpit as a sacred and awe-inspiring place, meant for the service of the gospel, she said, not to a particular political philosophy or candidate.
A different view of the pulpit's role.
A very different view. And the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, they also discouraged endorsements. They maintain the church's stance is not endorsing or opposing candidates, but focusing on forming conscience for the common good.
So kind of staying above the direct political fray.
Exactly. And then you had others like State Rep Quanta Cruz in Phoenix. She's also an associate minister calling it a slippery slope.
A slippery slope. How so?
Her concern was about blurring lines. She said it's really dangerous and that congregants expect you to speak truth every Sunday, implying that political endorsement might compromise that trust.
That's a heavy responsibility.
It is. And academics weighed in too. Professor Keith Miller at ASU's Center for the Study of Religion and Conflict, he worried it could unleash a wave of religious political activism.
Potentially more polarization.
That was his fear, adding to polarization because churches often tend to be, politically homogenous.
That's a lot to unpack. So, constitutionally speaking, where does this leave things? We're talking First Amendment, right?
Yeah.
Free exercise of religion versus the Establishment Clause.
That's the core tension, exactly. Professor Valerie Hoekstra at ASU called it the tricky part. When the Free Exercise Clause protecting religious practice clashes with the Establishment Clause stopping government support for one religion.
So how does this IRS shift navigate that?
Well, under this new interpretation, the Johnson Amendment just doesn't cover political endorsements from houses of worship anymore. But, and this is important, it still applies to other nonprofits, secular ones, other charities. They're still bound by it.
So it singles out religious groups for this freedom, which I imagine raises its own set of questions.
Well,
this isn't just an internal church matter, is it? It feels like a real retesting of that church-state separation line.
It really does. It potentially pushes congregations into more visible political roles, and it challenges, public trust in these institutions. It makes you think, how might this affect the conversations you hear, or how you see institutions engaging in public life? It's a real balancing act being redefined.
Yeah, definitely something to watch. But this political whirlwind, it's not just about policy like the Johnson Amendment. It's also hit the IRS leadership itself hard. Quite a shakeup there.
Oh, it's been incredibly tumultuous. Billy Long, President Trump's pick, he was sworn in June 16th, 2025, party line vote in the Senate.
And his term was supposed to run for a while, right?
Supposed to run through November 2027, but President Trump removed him August 8th, less than 2 months on the job, and nominated him to be ambassador to Iceland.
Wow. Iceland. Okay.
Yeah.
And Long's background. That's relevant too, isn't it? Former congressman.
Yeah, former congressman from Missouri. And notably, he co-sponsored a bill to abolish the IRS entirely.
Abolish the IRS.
Yeah, and replace income taxes with a national sales tax. His background is also in real estate auctioneering.
Okay, so less than 2 months. That tenure seems incredibly short for such a crucial role. Is that normal?
Not at all. It's unprecedented, really. Long was already the 5th commissioner leading the agency just since the start of 2025. Fifth. And his temporary replacement, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, makes it 6 people heading the IRS this year. That kind of rapid turnover, it inevitably raises questions about stability. Operational stability?
I would imagine so. And this instability, combined with the background of someone like Long who wanted to abolish the agency, it must have drawn criticism.
Significant criticism. Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, top Democrat on the Finance Committee, he released a pretty scathing statement.
What did he say?
He accused the Trump administration of having gutted taxpayer service, weaponized IRS data against innocent taxpayers, and setting things up for disaster during filing season. He basically said Trump picks incompetent, unserious people for serious jobs.
Strong words. Clearly reflects that political divide. But setting politics aside for a moment, just purely from an operational view, what kind of challenges does that kind of rapid turnover create for any large organization, let alone the IRS?
Well, beyond the politics, you see the operational strain reflected in public frustration, too. You look at places like Reddit, you see comments about basic things, IRS mail getting torn, crumpled, lost for weeks.
Simple delivery issues.
Simple, but crucial. Or incorrect stimulus checks being sent out. It suggests a struggle with, basic operational competence and consistency when leadership is churning like that.
It really makes you pause. When an agency as vital as the IRS goes through such rapid, high-level changes, what does that do to your ability, the public's ability, to trust its competence, to trust the smooth functioning of the whole tax system? It definitely raises concerns about long-term stability and service.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Let's look at the broader vision for what the IRS could be, especially the vision pushed by conservative groups advocating for pretty significant changes to policy, to culture.
Right, and a lot of the context here is pushing back against certain Biden-era policies, specifically conservative fiscal watchdogs business groups. They were really hoping for a review, maybe even dismantling, of Revenue Ruling 2024-14.
Refresh my memory on that one.
That was the Biden-era policy applying the economic substance doctrine, the ESD. It's a legal principle that basically says a transaction needs a real business purpose, not just tax avoidance. And applying it led to a noticeable spike in audits, especially on high-income individuals and small businesses.
Okay. And groups like the National Taxpayers Union objected to that strongly. They, along with the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, argued it unfairly targeted legitimate business structures. They saw it as agenda-driven enforcement, not about actual compliance, and they warned that keeping it would create a chilling effect on investment and growth.
So less aggressive enforcement.
That's a big part of it, and it connects to the Trump administration's government efficiency push the DOGE initiative. That reportedly cut back a lot of the IRS enforcement funding that had been boosted by the Inflation Reduction Act.
Got it. So they're pushing for a fundamental shift away from aggressive enforcement. The National Taxpayers Union Foundation laid out 10 crucial reforms. Can you give us the flavor of those? What are the big themes?
Well, it's really interesting is how these 10 reforms, even though they seem specific, paint a picture of a pretty radical proposed shift. The idea seems to be moving the IRS away from being primarily an enforcement agency towards one focused on customer service and enabling economic activity. It's almost redefining its mission for the next decade.
Okay, break that down. What are the key themes within those 10 points?
Sure. One major theme is definitely enhancing taxpayer rights and transparency. For example, they want the IRS to finally produce that regular report to Congress on tax code complexity. It was mandated back in '98. But rarely done.
And complexity is a huge burden, right?
Massive. Taxpayers spent nearly 8 billion hours preparing taxes last season alone, so simplification is key. Another point here is making the Independent Office of Appeals truly independent. No chief counsel lawyer sitting in without the taxpayer's consent.
More autonomy for appeals.
Exactly. And giving the National Taxpayer Advocate their own lawyer, independent from IRS leadership. All about protecting taxpayer rights.
Okay, rights and transparency. What's another big theme?
Modernizing operations and improving efficiency. This is crucial. They want a detailed plan with milestones for tech modernization. Because even with that huge $80 billion from the IRA...
That big infusion of cash.
Yeah, the IRS apparently spent a third of its modernization funds without a comprehensive plan in place, so they want accountability there. They also want Congress to have direct access to IRS technical staff, not just liaisons, so laws are written in a way that can actually be administered properly from the start.
Makes sense. Streamline the process. Okay, so rights efficiency. What's the third pillar?
The third one ties back to what we discussed. Reining in aggressive enforcement. They specifically call out halting this aggressive litigation strategy against things like conservation easements.
Those land preservation tax breaks.
Right. And microcaptive insurance providers, those small self-owned insurance setups that are sometimes seen as tax shelters. The argument is the IRS strategy punishes people taking lawful positions and often loses in court anyway.
So pull back on costly litigation.
Yes. And also rescind proposed rules that would weaken the no supervisory signature, no penalty law. That 1998 law requires a supervisor's okay before hitting someone with a penalty. Weakening it removes a key taxpayer protection.
Got it. Any other examples in that enforcement bucket?
Yeah, pausing the IRS-run direct file program. They argue the IRS overstepped its authority launching it. And rescinding what they call unworkable crypto regulations, arguing they apply old stock market rules too soon to digital assets.
Okay, so it's a broad package. It sounds like the overall goal is really to reshape that relationship between the IRS and the public. More rights, more efficiency, more transparency, less aggressive posture.
That seems to be the core thrust, yes, a fundamental shift in approach.
So recapping today, we've really unpacked some major shifts at the IRS. You've got the Johnson Amendment being lifted, opening the door for new political activity by religious groups. You have this unprecedented turnover in leadership at the very top, and then these sweeping calls for reform, pushing for a more efficient, more taxpayer-friendly IRS.
It really does raise a big question, doesn't it? In this era of rapid information, shifting norms, how do institutions like the IRS and like religious organizations navigate that tension, the tension between their traditional roles and these demands for more transparency, more responsiveness to different views, all while trying to actually serve the public effectively?
That is the question to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep digging for those insights.